Welcome, everyone. Tonight, before we begin our regular going through each line, I want to take you for a brief tour through the epic of Savitri, beginning with the books and the cantos, because many of us don't understand how Sri Aurobindo has formulated this work. I've told you before, I believe, that he has honored the style of all the great epic writers, Dante, Virgil, uh, Paradise Lost, look, Milton, uh, Goethe, in which they don't start at the beginning of the story. They give us flashback after flashback after flashback. So very briefly, if you can go on the first page, contents, we'll look at book one, which is the book of beginnings. And this book of beginnings has only 5 cantos, but they're extremely important because the first canto is about the attempt of the light to come down and the rejection of earth and man to receive it. The second canto is the issue. And in the first canto, we just heard a few words about Savitri. We haven't heard anything about the queen, and of course, nothing about Satyavan except the last line of Book 1, Canto 1. This was the day when Satyavan must die. And so we are thrown. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's happening with Savitri. We don't know what's happening with Ashwapati. We don't know anything about Satyavan except that one line. And then we go into Canto 3, which is the Yoga of the King. And this is our first introduction to Ashwapati. And he is the sage, we could even say the avatar. And the first part of this story of the Yoga of the King is how his soul gets released and all these great things begin to come into him. Occult things, things from higher worlds. And then Canto 5, and I'm skipping intentionally, Canto 5 is where he becomes who he truly is, the divine. But for some reason, Sri Aurobindo puts in Canto 4 the secret knowledge. And this is extraordinary because it's one of the greatest cantos for me in all of Savitri. But there are many great ones, so don't take that as the sole canto. But when we get into it, it will lift you so high. Now, book 2 is rather simple. It is, we're in the contents, just going briefly through the contents of the entire Savitri as an epic. So book 2 is Ashwapati's journey through all these planes of consciousness. And there are 15 of them. He goes to the heights, he goes down to the deepest depths, and he gets back up into the heights. I remember the world soul was Shraddhavan's favorite canto in book 2, and she almost knew it by heart. So after that, we go into book 3, which is the book of the Divine Mother. And this is where Ashwapati, again Ashwapati, realizes that he cannot do this work alone. He will need the help of the divine, sending him down someone, it will be of course Savitri, who has the power to unite with him. And here again is the story of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. So you see how it all wraps together. That is the end of book one, or part one. Part two is when we first hear about Savitri and her childhood. And it has 4 cantos, the birth and childhood of the flame, of which Mother has told us many things in the agenda and in her talks to the children. How she would, at 5 years old, sit in a chair, find herself in the sky with a great robe that would be protecting all the people. Oh, so many things she went through. And then the growth of the flame, Canto 2, the call to the quest. Now this is when she realizes that she has to find her companion soul. We don't know yet that it will be Satyavan. And then the quest is all about how she goes through these different countries, mountainous areas, desert areas, homes of princes and kings, and homes of yogis in the woods, in the forests. And book 5 then, in this part 2, is the book of love. And it's all about Savitri and Satyavan. Now book 6 takes us into 2 cantos which are extremely powerful and long, and they are the Book of Fate and the Word of Fate and the Problem of Pain. Now, Savitri has returned to the palace to break the news to her mother and father that she has found her answering soul. And in addition to that, Narad happens to be there, meeting with the parents. She doesn't know this yet. And talking to them, he's come down from the highest heavens, singing all these marvelous songs. And as he gets into the atmosphere of earth, his songs change to those of sorrow, sadness. So book 6 is very important because the Queen voices all the isms and doubts of the world. And it goes on for many, many pages. And Narad has to reply to all of those. Now, book 7 is the book of yoga. And this is Savitri's yoga. And there are 7 cantos where there's the joy of union with Satyavan, and then the realization of death, foreknowledge of death, the pain of her heart, the grief, and then she has to search for her soul. Right now she's just a young lady, maybe in her late teens, when she has met Satyavan. And so she has to find out who she is, and these cantos are extremely powerful. And book 8 is the book of death. Sri Aurobindo wrote so little about the book of death. He didn't have Canto 1 or Canto 2, just a little excerpt in Canto 3. And I'll tell you more about that later. Now, book 3, part 3 begins with book 9, the book of eternal night, towards the black void, the journey in eternal night, and the voice of darkness. And this is where Savitri has to carry Satyavan, who is dead. And this and book 10 are the powerful books where she debates with death and wins Satyavan back. And death is extinguished. His body was eaten by light. Now, Book 11 is one of the most beautiful books, and it is almost, well, there's just one canto, and it's the Book of Everlasting Day. And Book 12 is simply an epilogue, not very complete, but it's an epilogue of the return of Savitri and Satyavan to Earth and to her family, etc. So now we have the scope of that. Was the book ever finished? No, it was not finished. When Narad asked Sri Aurobindo, answered Sri Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo said, "What remains to be done?" And Narad says, "Well, there's the Book of Death and the epilogue, the return to Earth." And Sri Aurobindo very quietly and succinctly said, "We shall see about that later." So there's a hint there that Savitri is not completed, and the Lord will come back and continue the story of Satyavan and Savitri, because this is the story that we are entering into, and that is the transformation of the human body and the resultant divine life upon earth, which is clearly written in Savitri. So now we'll start with our usual, and I have to find it, of course.
Page 28.
28, huh? How can I get there? No.
It's open already.
28, no, it didn't get there.
Oh no, you want to go to the lexicon, right?
Yeah, I want to go to the lexicon.
This is page 28.
Yeah, but this is, yeah,
This is
good.
where we start.
Yeah.
He lived in those.
We begin with, he lived in the mystic space where thought is born, and will is nursed by an ethereal power, and fed on the white milk of the eternal strengths, till it grows into the likeness of a god. So we see that Ashwapati is so high now. He's living in this mystic space, which is far above our realm of body, life, and mind, which is far above these spiritual realms of existence. He's in the supramental now. He's in that mystic space where thought is born and will is being nursed by an ethereal power and being fed on the white milk of the eternal strength until it grows into the likeness of a god. And so we see here that Ashwapati, Sri Aurobindo, is in these occult rooms. In the witness occult rooms with mind-built walls, on hidden interiors, lurking passages, opened the windows of the inner sight. Everything is opening now. Everything is open to Ashwapati. Almost everything was open to Mother also, but she could not convert two of the asuras. And when she met that great serpent by the tree, and she wanted to enter that realm, he said, "No, you cannot enter until you conquer the sex impulse in humanity. Did not allow Mother to enter. But we see now that Ashwapati, he owned the house of undivided time. Very important word, undivided time. And then, lifting the heavy curtain of the flesh, he stood upon a threshold, serpent-watched, and peered into gleaming, endless corridors, still and glistening in the silent heart, for the coming of the new and the unknown. Now, he will get that much, much later, but this is the new world. He is listening for it in the silent heart, and it's the coming of the new and the unknown. Unknown because it never was on earth. No avatar brought it down before. We do have some statements of Christ that seem to point at it, that he will come again. There will be the resurrection, that is well known in Christianity. And so he now gazes. He gazed across the empty stillnesses and heard the footsteps of the undreamed idea. Once again, capital I for idea. And he uses the word real idea as a synonym for the supermind. And he uses gnosis also as a symbol for the supermind. He didn't want to use the supermind too often because of Nietzsche and his idea of the supermind, which was the Titan. In the far, he gazed across the empty stillnesses and heard the footsteps of the undreamed idea in the far avenues of the beyond. He heard the secret voice, the word that knows, and saw the secret face that is our own. Oh my gosh. He saw the divine in each of us. The secret face that is our own. The inner planes uncovered their crystal doors. Strange powers and influences touched his life. A vision came of higher realms than ours. A consciousness of brighter fields and skies. Now, this word consciousness is used by Sri Aurobindo in so many of his books. And I think we should stop for a few minutes and look into what he says, because it is not what most people think it is. He writes, ordinarily we mean by it consciousness, our first obvious idea of a mental waking consciousness such as is possessed by the human being during the major part of his bodily existence, when he is not asleep, stunned, or otherwise deprived of his physical and superficial methods of sensation. In this sense, it is plain enough that consciousness is the exception and not the rule in the order of the material universe. We ourselves do not always possess it. In such a view, the word consciousness changes its meaning. It is no longer synonymous with mentality, but indicates a self-aware force of existence of which mentality is a middle term. Below mentality, it sinks into the vital and material movements which are for us subconscious. Above, it rises into the supramental, which is for us the superconscient. But in all, it is one and the same thing, organizing itself differently. This is, once more, the Indian conception of Chit, which as energy creates the worlds. And this is from his Life Divine. So we see that this power of Chit is only operative in the supramental range. Chit does not create in the lower ranges. We can see, we can experience things in the spiritual realms of existence, but there's no creation. And in his letters on yoga, he tells us consciousness is not only power of awareness of self and things. It is or has also a dynamic and creative energy. It can determine its own reactions or abstain from reactions. It can not only answer to forces, but create or put out from itself forces. Consciousness is Chit, but also Chit Shakti. And this is something that Ranganath always talks to us about, Chit Shakti, because it's the creation, well, we can say through the feminine creatrix or Prakriti. And in the mother herself says, consciousness is the faculty of becoming aware of anything through identification, not through the mind, through identification. The divine consciousness is not only aware, but knows and affects. So we go back now to the text. A vision came of higher realms than ours, a consciousness of brighter fields and skies, of beings less circumscribed than brief-lived men. And here we have circumscribed, enclosed, restricted within limits, and subtler bodies than these passing frames. So we see that there are subtler bodies than ours, objects too fine for our material grasp, acts vibrant with a superhuman light, and movements pushed by a superconscient force. This is all speaking now of the supermind. He says in the Life Divine, just briefly, the superconscient is consciousness taken up into an absolute of being. So we continue, and I go back just a few lines, of beings less circumscribed than brief-lived men, and subtler bodies than these passing frames, objects too fine for our material grasp, acts vibrant with a superhuman light, and movements pushed by a superconscient force, and joys that never flowed through mortal limbs, and lovelier scenes than earth's, and happier lives. A consciousness of beauty and of bliss, a knowledge which became what it perceived, replaced the separated sense and heart, and drew all nature into its embrace. One day we will see, when the separated sense and the heart are fully conscious of beauty and bliss, and our knowledge becomes what it perceives, we will draw all nature into our embrace. The mind leaned out to meet the hidden worlds. Air glowed and teemed with marvelous shapes and hues. In the nostrils quivered celestial fragrances. On the tongue lingered the honey of paradise. And these 4 lines continue that extraordinary experience. So as his mind leans out, he meets the hidden worlds. And what marvelous worlds they are, where he sees, feels, smells, and hears so much. For some of us, we may have had 1 or 2 of these experiences. I know that Ranganath and I have often talked about the music of the spheres that we heard just for a few seconds. I mean, so brief, and yet you never forget it. It's something that lives in you forever. A channel of universal harmony. Hearing was a stream of magic audience, a bed for occult sounds earth cannot hear. Now this is most interesting because hearing was a stream of magic audience. Well, audience here means being able to hear. So you see how Sri Aurobindo puts it together. Hearing was a stream of magic audience. Not even that, but it's a bed for occult sounds earth cannot hear. These occult sounds are for me the guides for the Om choir. Because Mother has told us that Om is the voice of the Lord. What could be more powerful? Out of a covered tract of slumber self. This is the British pronunciation. In America we say covert, but I believe out of a covered tract of slumber self, iambic pentameter, pure. Covered, of course, means secret or hidden from view or knowledge. The voice came of a truth submerged, unknown, that flows beneath the cosmic surfaces. Now, I think that we usually understand surfaces like under the surface of the water, but I think the second definition is more appropriate. Beneath, hidden, or covered, or buried beneath the cosmic surfaces. Here's the definition for cosmic with a comment from Sri Aurobindo. He says, there is no difference between the terms universal and cosmic, except that universal can be used in a freer way than cosmic. Universal may mean of the universe, cosmic in that general sense. But it may also mean common to all. There is a universal weakness, but you cannot say there is a cosmic weakness. So you see how important each word is in Savitri. And when we read Amal's correspondence with Sri Aurobindo, we find that Sri Aurobindo will correct him on hardly or barely. The 2 totally different words, Sri Aurobindo tells him, and goes into it for a few minutes to distinguish the difference in hardly and barely. So we should pay close attention to the wording of Savitri, and I guess my time is about up. only mid an omniscient silence heard, held by intuitive heart and secret sense. So, what is this? This voice that comes out of a covert tract of slumber self. It comes about a truth that is submerged, unknown, and that truth flows beneath the cosmic surfaces. And it's only heard mid an omniscient silence. The secret of the Veda, Sri Aurobindo tells us, this is the omniscient, who knows the law of our being and is sufficient to his works. Let us build the song of his truth by our thought and make it as if a chariot on which he shall mount. When he dwells with us, then a happy wisdom becomes ours. With him for friend, we cannot come to harm. Secret of the Veda. And of course, Krishna tells us this all the time in the essays on the Gita. So, the last line for today, only mid an omniscient silence heard, held by intuitive heart and secret sense. So intuitive is from the intuition rather than from reasoning or observation. And it usually concerns spiritual vision or perception. So this voice of truth submerged is a voice of love. A oneness can only be heard in the omniscient silence and held by the intuitive heart and secret sense. Now, may I ask someone who has not read so far to read Savitri? Yes?
From here?
From the beginning where we started. He lived in the mystic space.
He lived in the mystic space where thought is born and will is nursed by an ethereal power and fed on the white milk of the eternal strength till it grows into the likeness of a god. In the weaknesses, occult rooms with mind-built walls, on hidden interiors, lurking passages, open the windows of the inner sight. He owned the house of undivided time, lifting the heavy curtain of the flesh. He stood upon a threshold, serpent watched, and peered into gleaming endless corridors, silent and listening in a silent heart for the coming of the new and the unknown. He gazed across the empty stillnesses and heard the footsteps of the undreamed idea in the far avenues of the beyond. He heard the secret voice, the word that knows, and saw the secret face that is our own. The inner planes uncovered their crystal doors. Strange powers and influences touched his life. A vision came of higher realms than ours, a consciousness of brighter fields and skies, of beings less circumscribed than brief-lived men, a subtler bodies than these passing trains, objects too fine for our material grasp, acts vibrant with a superhuman light, and movements pushed by a superconscious force, and joys that never flow through mortal limbs, and lovelier scenes than earth's and happier lives. A consciousness of beauty and of bliss, a knowledge which became what it perceived, replaced the separated sense and heart, and drew all nature into its embrace. The mind leaned out to meet the hidden worlds. Air glowed and teemed with marvelous shapes and hues. In the nostrils quivered celestial fragrances. On the tongue lingered the honey of paradise, a channel of universal harmony. Hearing was a stream of magic audience, a bed for occult sounds earth cannot hear. Out of a covered tract of slumber self, the voice came of a truth submerged, unknown, that flows beneath the cosmic surfaces. Only mid and omniscient silence heard, held by intuitive heart and secret sense.
Thank you so much. Beautiful reading. We'll have a few minutes of concentration and end with poem.